As you guys know, the last writing competition just barely finished, and I'm now grading the entries. Speaking of which, the award ceremony for that will be on the 13th of June, because I will be back from my trip by then. So, by the 12th at the very latest, you should know via email at least vaguely where you stand. I never say, like, you got first place or you got second place. I always say, like, you placed in the top 3 or you got an honorable mention. So you don't really know where you sit, you just know a general idea. But by the 12th on Wednesday, I'm going to have one of my coworkers, because I'll still be out of town at that point, email all of you guys and let you guys know what's up with that. As far as that goes, we also have another competition starting up as of today/summer. The prompt is write about an adventure at the library. And when I say the library, I mean any library. It can be a fantasy library, it can be a haunted library in the middle of the forest. As long as it's a library and an adventure happens, that's all I care about in your story. Feel free to go nuts and bananas with however you want it after. Or you can even have it be this library and have something dramatic happen. Whatever you want.
Someone didn't turn their books.
Do full-on Studio C skit. The libraries come after you. Anyway, whatever you'd like to do. Whatever you'd like to do, but as long as it has a library and there's some sort of adventure, go wild with it. All of the entry forms are out at the desk, but you can grab those in a second when we finish. Today we're going to be talking about 3 different types of plotting. These are not only the most prevalent types of plotting out your story, but it also is really helpful because even if you are not a plotter, you can use these after you finish to mark up your story and go, hey, here's where it is. Because typically, even if you don't like the idea of being set into a plot or whatever, there is kind of a formula, right? So even if you want to just do it in post and say, hey, I finished the story, now let's figure out what my plot looks like, you can absolutely use these for that as well. Also, the ones that I picked today are not only the most popular, but part of the reason why they're the most popular is because they're very loose, most of them. So even if you're not a big plotter, this isn't a big plot thing. These are very vague outlines, more of, is a good way to look at it. Yes, please feel free to sit down. Yes. All right, so the first type of plotting structure that we're going to be going over is the 7-point structure. This is my personal favorite.
Yeah.
Funnily enough, it is accredited to Dan Wells, but actually in his presentation about the 7-point structure, he admits that he got it from an RPG manual. So it's technically not his, but no one bothers to listen when he's like, it's from a role-playing game, and they're like, nah, whatever, it's yours.
So actually, no, it's yours now. We're plagiarizing for you.
For you, on your behalf, it's now yours.
Yes.
Yeah, seriously, it says Dan Wells everywhere, and I'm like, he literally said it wasn't, but okay.
Yeah, right.
So for this one, like I said, it's nice and vague. This one's a little less vague, though, I will admit. The next one we're going to talk about, the snowflake structure, is even better if you prefer super vague plotting. So with the 7-point structure, you've got one. Oh no, this marker already doesn't work. Yeet. Huh?
That's a cool whiteboard.
Thank you. I agree. I am very happy that we just painted the whole whiteboard wall with whiteboard paint. It's very cool. I like it. All right. So we have 1, 2, 3, 4. Let me even see if it's still 5, 6. Trying to make sure it fits on the screen. All right. So the first plot point in the structure is the hook. Now, funny story, when writing a short story, too many stories, when writing a short story, the hook is the first sentence, not the first paragraph. However, with a novel, or a novella even, the hook is the first paragraph or her first couple of paragraphs. It's what makes the reader want to keep reading. Is the first sentence still incredibly crucial in a novel? Absolutely, because some people don't read past the first sentence. However, most of the time, people are willing to read at least the first 2 paragraphs when it comes to a novel. Short story, on the other hand, if the first sentence doesn't get you, nah. It's kind of one of those interesting phenomenon amongst writing. So with your hook, you want to make sure that you have the reader asking, what happens next? If they're not asking, like, I'm intrigued, what do I want to know more of, not as good of a hook. For example, I actually had someone that I was editing their novel, and they had this, like, kind of okay first line, and then all of a sudden, like, 2 paragraphs down, they were like, well, at least at least I'm glad I'm moving because I hate these mustard-colored walls. And I was like, I actually think that would make a much better first line, because then you're like, oh, well, she hates these mustard-colored walls, but she's sad that she's moving. I want to know more, right? It makes you intrigued. It makes you want to learn more about this character instead of just going, oh, she's moving. Okay, don't care. It makes you much more intrigued about the character and want to know more about her emotions and her state, because you want your readers to care about your characters. Your character might be the most interesting character on the planet, but if your first few paragraphs are boring, no one cares. Which is why it's good to start with a killer first sentence and a fantastic first few paragraphs. The first few paragraphs were fantastic. She just needed a better first sentence. I gotta say, I definitely highly recommend it, actually. It's called Meeting Twilight by Arlen Carmen. It's fantastic. It's lots of fun. But she had a fantastic character and fantastic paragraphs. She just needed a better first sentence. Look. So, next is kind of funny how this one works. So the first plot point is the second point in the 7-point story structure. With this point in the story, you want it to be the result of the inciting incident, so the result of the hook, and it starts the journey. This is going to be about 20 to 25% of the way into your novel. So for example, if your novel is about 50,000 words, this is going to be about 5,000 to 6,000 words in. You don't want to do it immediately, but at the same time, you don't want to wait too long, because otherwise they're going to be like, why? Nothing's happening. You know, you want intrigue. You want people to be like, okay, so I was intrigued, and now I'm even more intrigued. The third point is pinch point number 1. There's lots of number 1s and 2s, considering it's a 7-point plot structure. So pinch point number 1 is going to happen within a couple pages after the first plot point, actually, but not necessarily like 3 pages or 10 pages or 12 pages, just soon enough after. You kind of want to do it so that way just about the time they're starting to lose interest in the hook, you hit the first plot point. Just about the time they're starting to lose interest, you hit the pinch point, that kind of thing. So you want to make sure that there's not a super huge lull in intrigue, but at the same time you don't want to just boom, 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 because otherwise then it's too fast. I've also read books where the pacing is just like running through at the speed of sound, and I'm like, oh, okay, that's too much. You need to have some relaxed times, but at the same time, that is true. That was just
book was
that just
very well
plowed
paced.
through.
Yeah, and the movie was like, and we're done.
And we're done. And you're like, whoa, how did we get here? Yeah, you don't want your readers going, okay, I have whiplash from your story. Not good. Whiplash is bad. You want your reader to go, okay, I'm starting to feel like the characters are interesting, but not much is happening, and then all of a sudden they're like, ooh, more is happening. So that way, gasp. All right, then you have the midpoint. With the midpoint, you want this to be about halfway through your story, but it can be a little more or a little less, about 50 to 60%, depending on, again, where your lulls are hitting versus your need for more action. For the midpoint, the most important thing is that the protagonist moves from reaction to action. So instead of being like, for example, Harry Potter's a great one, where he's constantly being like, oh, I'm a student, so I can't do anything. Oh, I'm a student, so I can't do anything. Oh, I'm a student, so I can't do anything. And then all of a sudden at the midpoint, he's like, gosh darn it, these adults aren't doing anything. Guess I have to do something. And so it's kind of funny because he moves from this reaction of, I'll just tell everyone else because the authorities will handle it, to going, gosh darn it, the authorities are doing nothing, so I better do something. It's the moment that makes your character go from interesting to I want to read the whole book. And the person goes, I liked this character, to, oh, I need to know what happens next. All right, point 5 is, wrote it in the opposite order. Pinch point, not point pinch. Pinch point 2. So the second pinch point, just like the first pinch point, should put the protagonist under pressure. The difference is that with this pinch point, the pressure comes from failure or feeling like they're going to fail. You don't necessarily have to have them exactly fail. For example, I recently was editing a novel and she didn't actually fail, but she was worried she might fail because of the fact that she was like, I have no one to help me get there, and in 2 days this place is going to be destroyed. How do I get there? That feels like a failure for a 13-year-old kid who's like, I have no way of getting across the country in time. So it felt like a failure. It felt like all was lost. And then all of a sudden she realized, wait a second, I have those friends that could help me. Okay, we're good. That's what the pinch point 2 is going to do. It's going to help get them from, crap, everything's a failure, I don't know what to do, to going, wait a minute. Yes, question. Sorry, 1 second. I'll get to you in a second. You're all good.
I've heard that said as the Dark Night of the Soul, where they like
True.
confuse
Yes,
people.
we're going to talk about that in the Save the Cat
Save
method.
the Cat thing.
Mm-hmm. We actually have the Save the Cat method.
so
That's what
good.
I'm talking about. So
That's
yes, you're both correct. That is very similar, which is part of the reason why these are the most popular plot structures, is because they're all very similar. Sorry, what were you going to say?
Pinch point is like when the character is feeling doubting and such.
Exactly,
and then,
doubt
and
and problems.
Yeah, then reinforce kind of that
And then kind of
stuff.
reinvigorates.
Mhm.
Exactly.
It's
precisely.
very. I can see that this kind of plotting.
Exactly.
You want to murder all hope except for that tiny little spark.
You
that
don't
turns
want
out
to murder
be
all
on
hope,
fire.
but at the same time, you also want the reader to go, oh no, we lost hope, and then give it back to them. Exactly. So, then you have the second plot point. So, the second plot point, everything comes together and the hero can fight/win. So you take the hope from this pinch point and turn it into actual stuff. Like, for example, with the one that I was just editing, she went from, oh, my friends might be able to help me, to asking her friends, can you help me, and ultimately getting them to agree to help her. So she went from a little bit of hope that maybe her friends would help her to, oh, my friends are helping me, I might be able to actually do this. At this point, this is going to be about 75% of the way into your novel. So you want to make sure that you're hitting this right before the finale, but not right before the finale. Just fairly close. All right. And then, of course, the resolution. Now, with the resolution, generally the end goal of the novel, what is, the hero wins. But they don't actually say the hero wins in this particular plot structure, and I like that, because if you are writing a tragedy, unfortunately they shall die. But, exactly. Hamlet, Romeo and Juliet, mostly Shakespeare. Are you okay, Shakespeare?
No, he's like me.
Just pats him on the back. Anyway, so your resolution can be anything you want it to be. Just make sure that you foreshadow it well. So if it is going to be a tragedy, you got to make sure that we've been sensing that it might be a tragedy the whole time. You got to want to make sure it gives that tragic feel to it. If you're just like, they're going to win, and then all of a sudden, they lost. That we're all like, excuse me?
They're gonna win, they're not gonna win.
You got to have some foreshadowing if you're going to do the tragedy
Part of
route.
me
I
wants
got
to
to
do
say
that.
that.
Not gonna lie.
It would be a very
something
big surprise, but not the kind of surprise that
Right, not the
books.
good
Yeah,
kind.
not the good kind.
Because having like a very interesting plot twist is totally fine.
Yeah, but that kind of plot twist,
Make
the
Marcella
person
die.
was evil, the other
Right.
would be evil.
Even with plot twists, you want to be able to see the plot twist kind of coming, Like when it happens, you're like, oh, that makes sense. You don't want it to be like, what?
You should be able to like read it again. Be like, gosh darn, they did foreshadow that.
Exactly. You want to be able to read it again and
That's
re-see
kind of
it.
how I felt.
However, you want to make sure that it's not like they read it again and they're like, yeah, I still don't get it. That's when you know you're doing too
That's
much.
when it's out of the blue.
Yep, and you're like, okay, that's concerning. So,
Yeah.
we have the snowflake method. Snowflake. So, the snowflake plotting method is even simpler. So that's part of the reason why it lends itself very well to those who are pantsers / gardeners, depending on what you call it. What?
I learned this today. I went
Yes.
to a different author thing and they said they did this.
It is a very popular plotting method. These are the top 3 plotting methods. So I'd be surprised if you haven't heard of it at least once before. So typically you want to think about what your hook/idea is. This is going to be what makes your book interesting/different from other books. You don't want it to be like, oh, it's Romeo and Juliet. And so the hook/idea is what makes it different. It's Romeo and Juliet, but with alligators. I don't know. I had dreams about alligators last night.
Romeo and Juliet.
You're like, that's too many things.
No, because our school did that in a play.
That is complicated. Anyway, but yes, the point being that the hook and the idea should be different from everything else. It should be essentially what sets you apart from everything else, even if your book is very similar to something else. There are lots of books about magic schools. Harry Potter's not the only one with a book about magic schools. However, they're all different and they have a different take on magic schools, and that's what makes the hook/idea interesting. All right, then you want to expand on that idea. You want to say, hey, what if this happened? What if I have a character like this? What if this character then has a backstory like this? And then you can branch off from that, hence why it starts looking like a snowflake. Following that, you can then expand into character. If you want, you can do your own character snowflakes and say, this character has a side character that's best friends with this character, that's best friends with that character, that has this traumatic backstory that we don't know about over here. And it then slowly becomes kind of snowflake looking like-ish. And at that point, that's when you want to write your first draft. When this snowflake looks much more snowflakey, that's when you want to write your first draft. That's when you're like, okay, I've got most of my ideas out on the page. Even if I have no idea how they're going to work, I at least have all of them out of me. And they're at least in a general gist, especially because this then allows you to be able to use the snowflake method to be a pantser/gardener, where you can just kind of let it go wild and free instead of feeling a little bit more restricted like some of the other plotting methods. Yes?
What is this pantser/gardener that you're
Good question. So pantser/gardener, it is terminology for when you don't have a plot at all and you just write. And so the terminology comes from flying by the seat of your pants, which is an old-timey phrase basically meaning that you're just going and you have no idea where. And then gardener is basically where you just like plant the seeds and just let it grow. Figure it out later.
I read my first book like that.
Yep, and a lot of people do. And even then, there are some authors that still do it to this day. A lot of people do, actually. I think Brandon Sanderson might be a gardener. I don't think he is an architect. Like, he does a lot of word building, but not plot building.
Yeah.
Anyway, that being said, though, the opposite of gardener/pantser is plotter/architect. And that basically just means that you have to have all of the plot written down in great detail before you even start writing the novel. So yeah,
I'm just thinking out loud.
there you go. Good question. Good to clarify, yeah. Always good to clarify these
I
terminologies.
made that connection
All right.
before the word architect escaped her mouth. Like, buddy.
All right, so
I did too.
then the ever-popular save the cat method. The cat is stuck up in the tree. How are you going to get him down?
I love this
down the
method
tree.
so much.
It is a good method, for sure. All right, so I actually really liked the way that it kind of had this because it kind of broke it up into about how much of your book it should be.
Mm-hmm.
So I'm going to kind of try to do it on the board. I'm not sure if it'll look pretty, though.
This is kind of a question. Are you
Yes.
using the Reedsy blog?
Sorry, say that again.
The Reedsy blog. Because I feel like they did a very similar thing. Maybe I'm just crazy.
Probably. I don't know. I'll be honest, I found this chart and I was like, ooh, pretty. So I'm not sure if it's from Reedsy. But good to clarify because Reedsy is also a good resource. Speaking of which, REEDSY. I would
It's
highly recommend
amazing. Use it.
It is. They have lots of articles about all sorts of fantastic good things. And beyond that, they also have lots of competitions and things like that. So if you want like more incentive, like I know we do competitions here and everything like that, but they do competitions almost weekly. So if you want lots of prompts to work on, that's great. Highly recommend it. All right. So the opening image. That's where we start with the save the cat method. Generally, in this metaphor, That's when you start with the cat being stuck in the tree, going, help! As cats do. Lots of cats. Anyway, pet cats do that a lot. Had to have a ladder outside my house for most of the time I owned a cat. Because that tree was her favorite place to be. Alright, so the opening image typically what makes us ask what's going to happen next. Because, I don't know if I were you, but if I saw a cat stuck in a tree, I'd be like, how is that cat going to get down? Similar to the what happens next of your opening image. Kind of saying, okay, I'm intrigued, now what? Alright, next point is the kind of theme is stated. You don't have to state it directly though. So I feel the need to clarify with the stating of the theme. When you state the theme, it's more of what is your genre? What is this book kind of going to be about? For example, with Harry Potter, this is basically you're going to a wizard school, Harry. Where it's like you're kind of stating the whole theme of this novel is Harry is going to a wizard school and he's going to figure out how to be a wizard. Or alternatively, if you're doing a horror, then it's going to be like the theme of this novel is I'm going to scare the pants off of you via this monster thing. It kind of dictates your genre and where you're going to go with it age group wise as well. For example, I actually learned this the other day, a little bit more in depth. I already kind of knew this, but I read a whole article on it, so that was very helpful. Middle grade novels are typically more about friendship and family, even the fantasy ones. If you'll notice, Harry Potter, for instance, and Keeper of the Lost Cities, all have friendship and family first, and then they go defeat the bad guy. And so that's typically what makes it middle grade. Whereas young adult novels is more angsty and like, I have to do this alone, and then the friends are like, you don't have to. So as a result, young adult tends to be a lot more, they try to do it on their own, and the friends force themselves to help. Or alternatively, they kind of find family along the way, even though they don't think they will. Those kinds of things. That is, again, really important to preface in the beginning of your story, because this is going to set up kind of what kind of reader you're looking for. All right, speaking of setup, the next one is setup. This is going to dictate kind of what you're going to do in the inciting event. So you don't necessarily have to have the inciting event right here, but you are definitely going to set it up for the inciting event. You're going to say, okay, all the pieces are in place. Now I just need to hit the last domino and they'll fall over, right? Think of it definitely like a domino act. You're setting all the things up and then you're going to knock it all down here in a second. Yes, question.
Could you give an example of this setup?
Yeah, absolutely. I'm going to use Harry Potter again, if that's all right. It's a very classic one, so a lot of people are used to it. So, let's use Harry Potter as an example. The opening image is obviously Dumbledore dropping him off on the doorstep and being like, the boy who lived, and all that. Then you have the theme stated when it has all these magical letters showing up, and Hagrid shows up and is like, yo, you gotta go to school, buddy. And he's like, what? So that's kind of stating the theme of basically, you're going to go to school, you're going to make friends, and you're going to learn how to be a wizard. That's the theme.
And you're going to like it.
Then for the setup, the setup is when he meets Ron and Hermione. And when he goes to Gringotts prior to that. Those are all three parts of the setup, because going to Gringotts sets up the idea that he knows what the Sorcerer's Stone is. Meeting Ron and Hermione helps him have the friends that he needs to do this in the future. Then, after that setup, you're going to have your catalyst. Or, in other words, your inciting incident. With your catalyst, for Harry Potter, for instance, this would be when the Professor Quirrell says, hey, there's a troll in the dungeon, and they all bond over defeating the troll. However, they also all go, kind of weird that Snape had that bite on his leg, and we saw that dog earlier, kind of fishy. In that case, that's the catalyst. So the setup for the catalyst is making sure all the pieces are in place. You know that there's something suspicious that he got out of Gringotts vault. You know that Hermione exists. You know that Ron exists. They're all starting to kind of become friends. Then you have the catalyst of them coming together as friends and learning that maybe the thing that was in that vault is the thing that was at Gringotts. Make a little more sense?
Yeah.
Cool. Good to clarify. I always like to clarify because sometimes I talk too fast. All right. Next is the debate. This is kind of where they start to go, I don't know, we're kids. Maybe we shouldn't get involved. You know, maybe we should leave this to the adults, you know, who can handle this. Then at this point, this is when it breaks into two. All right. Gonna get rid of the little readsy note over here. So, that being said, after it breaks into two, you kind of have this moment where there's a little bit of a lull leading up to figuring it out. So, you have the story still. However, you also have a little bit of fun and games / get to know the characters. Tried to do a G and a D in the same thing. That's not how that works. All right. So, a great example of this for Harry Potter would be the fact that they keep trying to use the cloak and all sorts of things to figure out more about what's in there, right? But alternatively, they do have a lot of fun along the way. They sneaking into places and getting Christmas gifts and all that stuff. And Hermione is like, oh, I check this out for a bit of light reading. You know, that line, that's a fun and games moment where it's kind of making fun of them and also bonding them as kids. But at the same time, it's also setting up more of the story.
It's kind of a relaxing, fun thing.
Exactly. Relaxing, fun part to read, but still pushing the story forward nonetheless.
Mm-hmm.
Exactly.
Yeah, I like that part of the books.
Exactly. Then you have the midpoint. So, with your midpoint of the story, now, if you notice, this is why I liked the diagram that I found. All of this should fit into the same amount of time as all of this. You have a lot to fit in the beginning, whereas the rest of the story is kind of, you can let it go a little bit by bit, more breadcrumb trail instead of like full meal like you do at the beginning. You want to be like, here's your appetizers, and then you want to go, okay, now the first course is ready, we'll grab that in a second, and then you just slowly give them the rest. With the midpoint, this would be the point at which Hermione and Ron and Harry are all like, dude, if we don't get that stone, Snape's gonna get it for Voldemort. That's a problem. Right after the midpoint is about when the bad guys close in. So this is when they're all kind of going like, hey, this is the third or fourth time that we've seen various sketchy stuff with Snape. I think that's concerning. And this is also when you see the unicorns getting the blood sucked out of them. And Harry Potter goes, crap, Voldemort, not good. And so it encourages them even more to get concerned and do more. All right. Then you have the all is lost. So, all is lost point is going to be just before the Dark Night of the Soul, funnily enough. Soul, long phrase. There we go. So, all is lost comes just before the Dark Night of the Soul. All is lost is like a kind of feeling like all is lost, but not quite yet. For example, a great point of this in Harry Potter is when they are, they're in the dungeon, right? And they realize that there's the devil's snare, and they're all like, oh no, we're all gonna die! And then Hermione's like, guys, just calm down. Like, if we can get out of this is not that hard. But it feels like all is lost in that moment for them. Then they get past it, and they're kind of like, they feel like there's hope, they feel like they can do this. And then the Dark Night of the Soul is when Harry realizes he has to go in by himself because Ron is severely injured, and there's only enough potion in the book. There's only enough potion to get him through and not Hermione. In the movie, it's just Ron's hurt and Hermione wants to stay with Ron because cute. So they did change that one. I'm still sad about the potion one. I'm like, should have done the potion one. It was cool. But anyway, so if you read the books, the All is Lost is the Devil's Snare, and the Dark Night of the Soul is when Harry Potter realizes he cannot go on with his friends, even though that was the plan, was to confront all together. And he gets really heckin' scared, understandably. At that point, he then realizes, though, that he has been given all that he needs to win, aka the finale. when he is able to realize that he is, kind of the idea of had that power within him all along, able to use the power of his mother's love to go, die, Voldemort, and burn his face off.
Be gone.
Exactly. Hence why it's a middle grade novel. But also it's cute. Then you have the final image. The final image is the idea of if you're wrapping up the series, this is the conclusion, and it's the conclusion. If you're going to do a series like Harry Potter, this is the moment when he's about ready to go on the train and he's like, I don't want to go back to summer, and Hagrid's all like, that's okay, have this photo album of your family, and he's like, oh, thanks. And it's all great and they're all happy, and he's like happy to come back next year, right? So there's Save the Cat with Harry Potter book 1 / movie 1. Any questions regarding Save the Cat? Or mostly just good? Save the Cat's good. Cool. Alright, those were the 3 plotting methods that I was going to talk about today, purely because there are so many plotting methods, like dozens and dozens and dozens of plotting methods we can talk about later. But these are definitely the best plotting methods for both pantsers and plotters. No matter if you are feeling like, hey, I don't really want to plot, then go with the snowflake method. If you're feeling like, hey, I really want in-depth plotting, Save the Cat, 100%. If you want somewhere in the middle, 7-point structure is definitely going to be your thing.
Or just because it's fun, 7-point structure is like top
It is very nice. And especially if you have finished a novel and you need to write what's called a synopsis for your querying.
Yes.
It's perfect for that.
So good.
The 7-point plot structure just makes it so you can nail that synopsis perfectly. It's nice. Well, we can talk about that another time, because I unless you correct me if I'm wrong, most of you are probably not querying novels right now. If you are, like, fantastic for you, but not typical of teenagers.
I could never.
So, that being said, that is the end of today's lesson. Again, next week I will not be here because I will be out of town until Wednesday. Wednesday night, but anyway, I will be out of town until Wednesday night, so I will not be here. However, if you have any questions, always feel free to email me, and I will be back again the next week. So I will see you in 2 weeks.